And it's live already, so you can share it. Get a good shot of you in the picture.
Hey, Facebook people. This makes me look very long-legged. I'm 5'2", so don't get excited. Oh,
Hey,
you
come
got a
here.
doggy.
Come here, Beige.
Bijou is here. Bijou? Yeah, there's your daddy. Who's your daddy? Hey, everybody. Welcome to Comic Spot. It looks like I'm an angel or something. I'm being transported up to heaven. This is Comic Spot, episode 890, pardon me. And today, my friend, my ex-neighbor, we kind of split up lately, his choice, moved on up to the west side of town. Today, Ty Rivera is here. He's a Vegas comedian. He's done a lot in the comedy world, and he still continues to give. And he's a working road comic. Didn't want me to say all that. Give it up for our friend and yours. You know you'll love him, you guys, and get to know him if you don't. Ty Rivera.
Hello, everybody. Ty Rivera. I just came from the gym, so my hair is a mess right now. Don't judge me too harshly.
Ty Rivera. Oh my gosh, you're my friend. We've talked, but I've never gone historically through your life. So I kind of want to know, like, where'd you grow? What do you call home? Or where were you born? Were you born and raised? Where were you born and raised?
I was born in Phoenix. I was born in Phoenix, Arizona, and then I was raised in Casa Grande, Arizona, which Casa Grande, Arizona is 45 miles southeast of Phoenix. It's a halfway point between Phoenix and Tucson. So a lot of people that have made that drive have been through my town, but not usually to my town or driven by it on the 10 because we're right off the 10.
Oh, cool. So you if I would have grown up with you, like been your neighbor or your sibling, what would I have experienced about you as a young kid?
I was quiet.
Really?
Yeah, I was actually quiet when I was a kid, and I don't think anybody would have assumed that I would grow up to be a comedian or anything public at all, because I don't know if I'd say I was shy, but I was definitely quiet. Well, even now, like people think of me as talking all the time, but when you hang out with me, it's not like I'm constantly on or, trying to be the center of attention. So, yeah, I guess it makes sense if you know me on a personal level that I would have been kind of quiet as a kid.
Yeah, because I've noticed as knowing you personally that you like to recharge your batteries by yourself. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the definition, and I know that this word gets a bad rap. It's a definition of an introvert.
Yeah.
You just recharge differently than I go to the airport to relax. I'm always on, not always funny, but I'm always on.
I'm not always funny, but I'm always on. Yeah, I spend a lot of time by myself. That's why, like I have a roommate now on the west side, and she's great, but it's an adjustment for me because I'm so used to being by myself in my apartment, like just me and Bijou, that I'm not, I'm not always up for the talking, and it's nothing against her. She is great, but just, like when you have a roommate, if you walk into the kitchen or the living room and they happen to be there, then there's probably going to be at least a quick conversation. And I've had roommates before, so it's not like that's completely foreign to me. But it's definitely an adjustment for me to have to get used to that again because I do usually spend time alone.
Yeah. So we know that you're a working road comic, paid, successful road comic with credits to your name. We know this. That's a given. And if you don't, you need to figure that out, but because it's true. But what is it that you do? I know you like to, you decorated your apartment really quickly.
Yeah.
So you have an artistic, what are some of your personal interests away from comedy?
Going to the gym. Lately, I've been obsessed with tarot. Like, I've been
Like tarot cards?
yes. I don't well,
I wanna do that.
yeah, I bought tarot cards when I was in Tucson. I was on the road with a comic by the name of Bruce Leonard. I brought him with me to Laughs at Tucson. And I had I have an interest I've had an interest in tarot cards for a long time, but I never bothered trying to read them. And I bought this deck that was a tattoo tarot. And so it's based off of old our classic tattoo designs. And it's a good deck, but it's not the best for learning. Because if you pay attention to the tarot cards, what you'll notice is if you get like the traditional deck, which is I think it's called Rider deck, those actually have pictures that kind of explain what it is the card means. And so you probably are better off learning on those. And then, once you know the meanings of what the different cards are and the different suits basically, because there's like wands and then there's coins and so once you figure out or coins and pentacles are interchangeable depending on what deck you're using. But once you figure that out, then it's better to move on to. And so like mine, it hasn't been easy for me to figure out because the ones that I have, like I said, are like a different, then they're more tattoo style. So they're cool. And but I have to look up the meanings all the time. So I definitely don't get them. And I also don't fully understand yet like what they mean. Because different cards, like when they show up with other cards, like that'll change the meaning of them, and then also if they're reversed, that'll change the meaning of them. And so, I like that's the kind of stuff that I usually like to learn about, is like more the esoteric or occult style, like a lot of my tattoos are from that. And so, but it's just, that's the kind of stuff that I usually like to learn. And then I've got, a job coming up, which is going to be a job. I don't know if you saw that on Facebook.
No, tell me.
Well, a good friend of mine, he's a comedian, he's a newer friend. His name is Brian Shenanigan. You probably know him. Yeah,
I love Brian.
yeah, you interviewed him. Well, he's opening up an ice cream shop, Brewster's. I forget what the full name is, but Brewster's is it Brusters, and they it's part of a franchise. So obviously, with the franchise, there's certain rules, and so they have to have a certain amount of employees in order to open up, in order for the corporate to send them their food and stuff like that. And so he was running short on employees because right now nobody wants to work, which is something everybody's talked about. And you know how people will get into the debate. Like I don't get in a lot of debates like that, but some people get into debates well, they don't work because there's not enough money in there. It's not a livable wage or whatever. Like whatever. For whatever reason, he's had trouble finding employees. And so last night he was talking about it, and he mentioned it the night before. And so last night, and I don't need a job. Like that's like the thing with me, and like it's also the reason that I'm open to working is because I think if I need it, I would resent it. But since I don't need it, I can be very chill about it, which is like the way I live my life. I'm a lot more chill than a lot of people would really imagine I am. And so, like, since I can be chill about it, and when he first mentioned it, I was like, okay, well, good luck with that. I hope it works out. You know what I mean? And then last night he mentioned it again, and he was like, technically, we could have opened a week ago as far as the store being ready. It's just we don't have the employees that we need. And so, I said, like, well, if worst comes to worst, hit me up and I'll come in and work for you. And then he was like, well, we could have opened a week ago. And I was like, all right, so I'll go through the process tomorrow, which that was last night. So, and I have this thing about keeping my word.
Me too.
Yeah, and so since I said I was gonna do it, now I gotta go do it. And so today I did all the stuff that I had to do so that he could, and I have to interview at 4, which is just gonna be a formality. They have to do it, but like I'm basically already hired. It's just a matter of going through all the proper steps. And like, even though I don't have to work, I am going to take it seriously and be a good employee for him, because who needs somebody to come in and just mess around, or, not help them out the way they need. But I also told him, like, once everything gets off the ground and you get the employees you need, then I'll probably just quit. And he was like, well, if you just want to do events at that point, because, they're going to have like ice cream truck, and they're also going to have where they do like catered parties and stuff like that. I guess it's a kind of high end ice cream type thing. And so he said, if you want to just do the events, those will usually pay really well. And I am not one to turn down money. So if I can make decent money doing events and stuff, once I learn the job in the store, then, I'll be open to that. But that's something that's going on right now.
That's super cool. So you have tattoos. You mentioned tattoos. Tell us about your venture. I want to hear about comedy, but I want to hear about you starting to do tattoos. When did that start?
I got my first tattoo
Does
when
this
I was.
bother you that
No.
I brought it up?
No, I just don't.
It's just so interesting.
It's just I have so many. I got my first one when I was 17, and my parents had to sign off on it, but they were very cool about that. And that's like an ankh, that's which is the Egyptian cross, and that's on my left like shoulder or my back. And so there's that, and then, so that's where it started. And then then I was kind of chill about getting tattoos, and then it's just really ramped up in the last 2 or 3 years. But it's also because I'm getting older, and so I feel like anything I want to do, I should just go ahead and do now. So it's not like midlife crisis type thing where it's like that, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to be wild or whatever. It's like, no, I always wanted to be fully sleeved. Like, really, I want at least half sleeves on both arms. And this arm is pretty close. I just need to get stuff to like fill in. And then my hands. But like, the problem with the tattoos, and the reason I haven't gone faster, is because you also have to heal them. And that part is kind of annoying. I mean, like, it doesn't take long, but it is annoying just in the way that you got to watch how you sleep, and like that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, so I guess, like I said, like, it was going kind of slow, and then in the last like probably 2 years, that's when I really started getting a lot more. And I'll be getting more, I think, probably this month. And that's probably what I'll use the money from the ice cream shop for,
Yeah,
is just get more tattoos.
that's so cool. I love seeing people with tattoos and picking one out, just one. And instead of saying, "Oh man, look at your," I like finding one and go, "Tell me about that one." Every tattoo has a story.
Which one do you notice? Which one have you noticed?
Well,
we
since
hung
I'm
out.
a veteran, the star.
Oh, the stars are probably the most superficial. I just like them. You know what I mean?
They are for us veterans too, though.
Yeah.
You get down to it. The star.
Yeah, I'm just so like, that was like, I got those probably 10 years ago, and it was just, like, I liked them, and I was like, let me get a bunch of stars. So I got a bunch of stars, and now I got to figure out how I'm gonna have them like fill in between them.
Yeah.
I'd like to say, there's this many stars and they stand for this, and I don't even know how many stars I have. I think there's 9, but I'm not sure.
You'd be the Betsy Ross of tattoos.
Yeah, I don't know. You know what I mean? Yeah, the 13 original colonies, or
The number of people you killed.
yeah, it's not that deep. They're just stars.
Remember back in the day where everybody said, like, if you had tattoos on your neck, you were a narcissist or a killer, and if you had teardrops, that's the number of people that you killed.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
so judgmental.
Well, the teardrops, that's a thing from prison, that was a prison thing, and people do, or I don't know if they still do. I'm sure they do, but that was the thing. Like, the number of people you killed was like the teardrop tattoos. But I have tattoos under my eyes. One is the Om symbol, and then the other is St. Peter's cross, which a lot of people think is a satanic cross, but St. Peter's cross, is a Catholic thing. and it was Saint Peter had he didn't think he deserved to be crucified the same way Jesus Christ did, so he wanted to be upside down. And so that's what that one stands for. So people a lot of times think that because I have this upside down cross, that's a satanic symbol. Actually, this one is a satanic symbol.
Told you.
Yeah, this one is Catholic. This one.
You were close, thank
Yeah,
you.
if you're in the right vicinity, you're just picked the wrong tattoo.
Speaking of Judaism,
Yeah, close it up.
so in the Jewish tradition, if you have a tattoo anywhere, you can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
And I'm half Jewish. I think it's probably this half. And so the Jews don't accept me because it's the wrong my mom.
Yeah.
So I wanted, before I croak, I'm allergic to dye, but I want to get a tattoo just to go like this. The judgmental people that won't let me get buried. No, I think you got it wrong. I can't get buried there.
So yeah, so I guess the people I know, Jewish people can be very picky about that. Like it is certain rules, and your mother has to be the Jewish one in order for you to be Jewish. And I think you can still be Jewish, but you just would have to go through the whole process of,
Schooling.
Yeah.
Yeah, and money. You gotta drop money in the bucket. I found a rabbi in New York, they'll let you go through the whole shebang for nothing.
Oh, nice.
But I don't know that I want to do it because, both the Jews and the Christians didn't want me around, so I don't know that I want to skate through life.
Well, that's a part of the thing with my tattoos, and why they are the way they are, because I do think at this point, especially me being Catholic, with what we know about the Catholic Church and what the priests have done and how far up the chain that went and the cover-ups, I don't really think you can take organized religion seriously no matter who you are. There's just been too much that we found out where it's like, nobody's really as good as they pretend to be. So just drop the religion part. If you believe in God, then believe in that. If you believe in just a higher power, then believe in that. But so I don't think that's a joke, and I think that's great, and it helps keep people balanced and gives you a moral compass and stuff. But as far as all the rules that they put on us, if you're Catholic, birth control is not supposed, you're not supposed to do birth control, and it's just like a lot of stuff that they did. When you look at the way that religion works, it was a lot of trying to keep people poor so that they could keep the control. Because if you don't have any control over the number of kids you have, that's going to lead you into poverty. Well, poverty usually leads you to have a lot of faith, and so that keeps you feeding into the system.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and also, if you didn't keep having kids, who would the priest date? I said date just not to get us in trouble on Facebook. I'm very aware of standards and policies, Facebook.
I haven't seen censors on TV really doing their job lately. I'm seeing a lot of stuff everywhere slide through the cracks. Have you noticed that?
It's because it's a dying medium. It really is, and so they have to do things to spice it up and try to keep people, because they're competing with stuff like this. They're competing with Facebook. They're competing with YouTube. And even though Facebook and YouTube, you can't just say anything you want, you do have a lot more leeway than you do on, network television. And so they're having to scramble because they're having to compete with content like this.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So then how do you explain the Food and Drug Administration not doing their job lately?
Well,
I'm sorry, I'm going off the rails again.
yeah, but they've been not doing their jobs for a long time. It's just now we notice. Everything that we realized is either corrupt or faulty. Really, we could have figured this out years ago if we had just had the internet. It's just nobody used to connect, That's why I say people use the internet in the wrong way. Because people use the internet to fight and argue with each other, when really people should use the internet to get together and figure out, oh, so we're all being screwed. But instead people are like, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican. And it's like, well, why don't you stop arguing with each other and actually look at your leaders, whether you're Democrat or Republican? And you say this and people get mad at you because they're like, well, of course you would say that. You voted for Donald Trump. And it's like, no, I'm saying like even him, like, I voted for Donald Trump because that was the lesser of two evils, in my opinion. I know some people thought he was a devil. Really, he wasn't able to do much, and it was because anytime he had an evil idea, anytime he would start rubbing his hands, he'd have to pick up the phone and do Twitter and then tweet about it. And they'd be like, oh, okay, so this is what we have to block now. And nothing went through. Everything got thwarted because this idiot could not stay off Twitter, which is part of my plan, because it's like, if you get somebody that's going to tell you their entire plan all the time, they're far less dangerous than somebody that's like more in the system like Hillary was, or, and
Absolutely.
knows all the things to get it past you without you even noticing. Like, that's one thing people have noticed, when they look back on like the Clinton administration or even Obama, when people look back on it, they're like, hey, we didn't even notice that these things were happening. When people were talking about Standing Rock, the consequences of Standing Rock happened when Trump was in office. And so people were blaming Trump for that. But if you actually looked into Standing Rock, that was something that went through when Obama was still president. Just it happened to go into effect during Trump's administration, so it looked like it was Trump. And I voted for Obama twice, and I don't think he was a terrible person or anything, but just in politics, people always get screwed. And so, and then I also like read an article where they were talking about like with the Standing Rock situation, one of the tribal elders had told the tribe, had tried to let everybody know on the reservation, like, look, this is what's about to go through. And nobody wanted to show up and protest it before it happened. Well, with bureaucracy, it's usually easier to stop something from happening than it is to stop it once it's already in motion. So before it's gone into effect, it's easier to stop it. Like say this apartment, if they wanted to do eminent domain here and like take it down, once you hear that, then right away you should get with your neighbors and see like, okay, let's see what we can do to stop this, instead of hitting the effective date where now it's going to happen and it's on the books to happen on this particular date. And then you're trying to stop and it's like, no, this is already in motion.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, so where you grew up, were you the only child?
No, I have 3 sisters.
Older? Middle?
2
Where are you at?
older. I was the baby until I was about 6. And then my sister came along and stole my thunder.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, she took the baby spot.
Little brat. So how is it that you're able to be so wise? Where did you get so, I'm like, people in the comedy community come up to you and think of you like a rabbi. Do you know this? And your videos prove it. All the information you give and advice, you're able to break down truth from a lie, and when you're going too far, and when to rail it back, how to solve problems between people. Where'd you get it?
With comedy specifically, like when I do the comedy tip videos, believe it or not, that came from keeping my mouth shut in the beginning and just observing everything. So, everybody thinks of me as being like really boisterous, and so that's the way people think of me. But they don't realize when I first started doing stand-up, I just stayed quiet and I sat back and I watched the way everything worked. And I probably did that for a good 3 or 4 years. Like I had my friends and I chat with them and the other open micers that were my friends, I tell them about things that frustrated me or got on my nerves, but I wasn't like, super open about like everything. I just kept it to myself in my small circle. But like for the most part, I just watched the way things work and then, learn from that. And then when it comes to like just advice in general and stuff like that, and the way I live my life, that's from being really, and not in a bad way, but I'm really hard on myself when it comes to what my behavior is. And like, if you listen to my podcast, sometimes I'll go hard on the people that have made me mad, and I'll be like, this is all the ways that they messed up.
Right.
And so then
you only do that if you're also hard on yourself.
Well, that's the thing. Like, sometimes in the moment, that's the way I feel. And you do get into that thinking of they're wrong, they're wrong, they're wrong. And so you point out all the ways they're wrong. And then later on, I'll think about it more, and not obsessively, but I'll just think about it more analytically. And then I'll be like, oh, well, maybe when you did this, this is what made them do that. And so since I do that with myself, it's also easier for when people come up to me and ask me advice for me to like look at their situation and be like, yeah, because I think that's a place a lot of people mess up. Like sometimes people think like because I'm your friend, now when you come to me with a problem, I'm supposed to only have your back. And I do have your back as far as, like publicly, I won't like, tell your story or whatever like that.
Yeah.
But when you're asking me for advice, I'll also be critical of your behavior too, and just be like, this is where maybe you could have made it so that that didn't go down like that. And like, so I think that's why a lot of people come to me for advice because they know that I won't just enable them. Because, enabling will eventually lead to a person wrecking themselves if you're not careful. Because if you never, if your friends never correct you and instead they enable you and they just tell you what you're doing is right, then you continue down that track and maybe you're not doing things right. And what's going to happen is you're going to progressively get worse because you have people around you that aren't being honest with you and aren't helping you right the ship.
We've seen that all the time with celebrities having yes people around.
Yeah, yeah,
So, for instance,
yeah, it's exactly what it is.
a lot of these deaths of celebrities, early deaths, can be prevented if they wouldn't have yes people. If they'd have someone like you that's really honest around.
Yeah, but the problem with that, because I've had some like celebrity friends, and the problem with that is eventually they get rid of you if they, and so it's almost like, and I don't think that this is a bad thing. I think that, the people around them should stand firm and be like, okay, well then get rid of me too. Just until you end up alone. Like with the celebrity, maybe that's the way they would hit rock bottom if they couldn't even hire anybody good to work for them or help them out anymore. But instead, a lot of times what happens is a good person will slowly start like acquiescing to what the celebrity actually wants them to say. So it'll start off where they're like, okay, I'm going to tell this person the truth. They want me to tell them the truth. And then, the person will get mad at them. And they'll be like, well, I don't want them to get mad at me and I don't want to lose my job and I don't want to lose being VIP because all of that is very attractive. I can tell you that from the other side, like being on the other side of the velvet rope and being VIP and like all of that is very attractive and it is something to give up, and like it also does give you a more honest perception of what's going on though, especially in a city like this, like because not too long ago some friends of mine were being impressed by somebody and they were like, yeah, we're gonna go to this club and it's VIP. And I was like, oh, cool. And they were like, do you want to go? And I was like, I'll see if I can go, and I had one errand that I had to run before I could meet up with them at the club. And so, they're getting in VIP. And so I hit them up and I was like, so how's the club? And they're like, well, we're not inside the club yet. We're waiting in line. And I was like, okay, that's not VIP. Like VIP is like you go in through another entrance, or if you go into the main entrance, you just walk right past the line. You're like, see ya, suckers, to all the people in line. And you go in, and then they bring you to a table, and there's usually like already a bottle or two set up at the table, and mixers, couple bitches throwing throwing mixing cups around. Maybe they got some glow sticks, you're like, I know. Yeah, I know VIP, so like when you tell me VIP, and then I call you 30 minutes later, or message you 30 minutes later, and you're like, we're in line, I'm like, you're not VIP, I'm not going. I don't go wait in line, so I don't.
So you had 3 other sisters? 4.
3 sisters. Well, I also, I guess 4 is correct. But one of my sisters I didn't grow up with, but I have a good relationship with her. I haven't seen her in a while. Like, good relationship for me is like, I don't talk to people all the time, even people like my parents, they're my best friends. I love my parents, but I don't talk to them even weekly.
Yeah.
You know.
And you had said you have friend that's a girl in New York that's like your best friend, and I know Claire is close to you.
Yeah, and I haven't talked to Claire in like 2 weeks now. I need to talk to Claire. And I put it on the list, I'm like, I will talk to them eventually, but it's just my best friend, I talked to her because 2 days ago was her birthday. So I called her, and talked to her for her birthday. Not on her birthday, the day after, the morning after, but
It's so funny to call them on their birthday, I think.
Well, yeah, and they're like, and like everybody that knows me knows I'm just very natural about that stuff. So, like I love you and I'm glad it's your birthday and like I'll get some talk time. But I would rather like wait till the day after your birthday because that's what works for my schedule as far as me being able to give you dedicated time. Because I can give you a rush phone call on your birthday, like while I'm running errands and be like, hey, happy birthday, whatever. Or we can wait till the next day at 4 a.m., when I have I can give you undivided and we can have a good, meaningful conversation at that point. And I can give you like my version of a birthday present, which is like a real conversation, a real friend conversation.
Yes. Talk to me about what happened to you after growing up with 4 sisters. Where did you do after high? What's your life been like since growing up with your family? Can you
Yeah, I grew up, okay, here's the deal, and I've talked about this before, some people don't know it though, so I feel like it bears repeat.
Okay.
When I was younger, I knew that I didn't like girls.
Okay.
You know what I mean? That I wasn't attracted to girls. I liked girls, I liked hanging out with girls, but I knew I wasn't attracted to girls. I knew that from a very young age, probably when I was 5 years old. Well, around that time, maybe actually before that, probably when I was 4, my sister had told me that if you don't like girls and you're a boy, then you must be a girl. And if you don't like boys and you're a girl, then you must be a boy. And so me knowing that I didn't like girls, I felt in my head because of what my sister told me and not because of anything else, that I was trans, which I didn't know the word trans or anything, but I just thought I was meant to be a girl. You know what I mean? I must be a girl. And so in my head, yeah, until I was probably 15, in my head, I just had this thing hanging over me where I felt like I'm a girl. I'm gonna have to be a girl. Eventually, one day I'm gonna be a girl. And so that's really what I thought. And then I realized gay was an option, just being gay. But I grew up in Casa Grande, Arizona, and we didn't have a lot of gay people, and the few gay people we did have, they made fun of and stuff like that. So it was like, this weird situation when I was younger where, like, I was kind of depressed a lot of the time, because I thought that that's what the situation was, that I was, going to have to eventually be a girl. And so, eventually, what happened was, I wanted to be popular. I wanted to be like the regular kids and stuff like that. And I already did have like popular friends. There was a situation when I was younger where some people bullied me and like, I had effeminate mannerisms because I was raised with sisters and my dad worked all the time and my mom was, at home, stay-at-home mom. And so like, I learned to blend in with the other boys. I learned to mimic the way the other boys were and stuff like that, which has ended up being really marketable in the gay community for me in dating now, because a lot of guys like me because I am masculine. But so I learned to do that, and then I had a popular little existence until I decided I didn't like school anymore. So I dropped out when I was in the 9th grade, or just after the 9th grade, the beginning of the 10th grade. And my mom only had one rule: you could drop out of school if you wanted to, but you had to get your GED as soon as you were eligible for it. So I got a GED as soon as I was eligible. And then I started working like, McDonald's and a grocery store job. And, I had all the little silly jobs or whatever. And I started hanging out with gangbangers by accident.
How did you do that by accident?
Because I didn't know, because I was from Casa Grande and we moved to Phoenix. And I didn't know that the people I was hanging out with were gangbangers. And, like they were sort of related to me, not complete family members, but like close like family. And so they didn't want their parents to know that they were gangbangers, and their parents were like playing blind in a way, you know what I mean? Because you have to do a fair amount of denial or be in a fair amount of denial not to notice your kids are. But me being from Casa Grande, Arizona, I didn't know what gangbangers look like. And they told me that they weren't, you know what I mean? They're like, we're not in a gang. And so I believed them, and then I got hit by a bullet in a drive-by. It was a ricochet, but it was in a drive-by intended for the party that I was at, and so I got hit by a bullet, and then that's how I found out that they were gang affiliated. And then from then on, I knew what I was hanging out with. I did get jumped into the gang technically at a point, like several months later after I healed up from my gunshot.
Where
And
did the bullet go?
it went in right here. Like every doctor has said that this is the craziest thing. It went in right here because I was sitting just like this. So it went in right here. It came out right here, and it went back up into my thigh. So it would have been like they would have had to damage too much muscle to pull out the bullet, and it wasn't doing anything anyway. It wasn't going to hurt anything. And so they just left it in there because, it would have been too much. Whether they went through the top or the bottom, they'd have to rip through a bunch of muscle to pull it out. And so they were like, it's not going to do anything. It's just going to eventually the outer casing is going to calcify. And so basically it's like a bullet encased in bone now.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I hung out with them for a while. And then at one point they decided to go to this gay bar to steal cars. It was called Cracking Cars at the time. And I was supposed to be like a lookout, but I was like, let me go see what's going on at this bar, you know what I mean? And I was very curious because it was a gay bar. And by this point, I already knew that I was gay. I already knew gay was an option, you know what I mean? And so then it was just a matter of like coming out. And I thought I would never come out, but also living in Phoenix opened that up because there were gay bars in Phoenix and it was more. And so once I saw that, then eventually, like within a couple months after that.
Excuse me, I didn't know this.
Okay. So within a couple months after that, that's when I figured out the gay bar. I don't remember how that all went down, like me figuring out the gay bar had like an after hours or, and then I got a fake ID shortly after. And this is all happening when I'm like right at the end of being 16 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I got fake ID and everything. So by the time I was 17, I was already like fully at the gay bars and stuff like that. Wasn't completely comfortable with being gay at that point, obviously, but I had already started the process of being out. And then, shitty relationships, shitty boyfriends, because when you're 16, 17, the quality of guys you're going to attract will often be good looking, but they're not the most, they're dating a 16 or a 17-year-old. So that should tell you a little bit about, in their 20s, 25, 28, 23 was I think the youngest that, I was with at that time. And like I said, I was 16 or 17. So like, they were like in a lot of cases, verbally, mentally abusive. One of them was physically abusive, but I figured out I could beat him up, and so that was an effective physically abusive situation for him at that point. And so, but yeah, so like bad relationships, that kind of stuff. Then I got into drugs, but like I would never say I was addicted to drugs. I just like my best friend. I met a guy who ended up being my best friend. And he was a drug dealer. He was a meth dealer, and meth was a big party drug for the gays at that time. Still is, if we're being 100% honest. It's just I'm not part of that crowd anymore, or I don't run with those people anymore. But so I did a lot of drugs. I went to hair school for a short while. I didn't like that. Well, I realized I wasn't gonna make money doing hair because the only person's hair I like doing was my own. Like people would come in and I'd be like. Really wanna, you know what I mean? And so like, so then, what's your problem? So then I went to hair school for a while, but at the time I was partying and, like doing a lot of partying, that kind of stuff. And then I got into sex work while I was in hair school. Like one of the guys that I went to hair school with told me about a friend of his who was an escort. And so then, I was escorting Phoenix but I was just doing it kind of like barely, because I didn't like it in Phoenix, because in Phoenix, it was like people would like charge a little bit of money, like $100, and then they'd like, the client would expect a lot from me. And so I didn't really like it, and I would do the ones only where I knew that they were like basic and not gonna want a lot from me. And then, but my sister, she's died since, but she also was a sex worker, and so she told me the way it worked and like the rules and stuff like that, because like we were best friends. And so she told me not the rules, but like how to make money, like how the girls do it. And so then I adapted that, and some people in Phoenix didn't really like that, because that's not the way it worked. And then I ended up meeting this guy on one of my calls. He was a client, and he was like, I live in Vegas, and the guys make a lot of money there. And so he asked me if I wanted to, or he said, if you ever decide you want to come to Vegas, you can stay in my apartment. I have an extra bedroom. And he made it sound like he had a lot of money. And so at one point I fell out with my drug doing friends, my party friends, I didn't like them anymore. And I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do next. But I was like only maybe 19 by this point, and so I hit that guy up and I came to Vegas, and then I figured out the way the escorting game worked here. And then I did that, and it was on from there. You know what I mean? Like I was really good at making money in Vegas, like in sex work and escorting. And I really did enjoy it. It wasn't like I didn't like it. You know what I mean? Like I liked the amount of money that I could make. I liked the way that because like, if you do it like, sometimes I make fun of it on stage where I say like dumb whores, I don't understand, like why they do all the stuff they do. But like if you do it if you do it in a way where you make a lot of money, then there's a lot of like mental involved in it. Like there is a lot of like you figuring them out, them figuring you out, you figuring out how to get the most money out of them trying to get the most out of you at the same time. And it's like this game where it's like, you're kind of blocking each other, but at the same time, if you're both smart, you're both doing what you have to do to make sure everything keeps going. And so I did that for, that was for quite a while. And then and then I got out of that, then I got injected with silicone at a point, which I talked about that before. That started like the kind of plastic surgery type stuff. And, like when I say started, it just started that, but then that changed like my reality with escorting and that kind of stuff. And so then I didn't really want to do that anymore. Then I went back to Phoenix and lived a very like normal life. I met this guy that was actually the best guy I've ever dated in my life. Which you say that and then people think you're pining for them or you're still in love with them. But it's not like that. He just was the best guy I ever dated in my life. It turned out to not it wasn't meant to be, you know what I mean? Like it was just like I needed to go do stand up. And so I had to move, and we were probably together for like a year and a half or something like that, of like living together, like actually being together. And he really was supportive, and he really did have my back and stuff like that. And we're still friends to this day. We don't talk all the time. And he's been married for over 10 years now. I want to probably closer to 15 years or something like that, but there's nothing inappropriate about when we do see each other.
Yeah.
Like I'll take him to lunch every once in a while or something like that when I'm back home in Phoenix. And like, I don't flirt with him or he's got a husband, he's married, and I respect that. And so, but yeah, so then I went to LA, and that's where I really started doing comedy.
Okay, so what happened between escorting and comedy that made you decide to go into?
I think that did have something to do with the fact that my sister died. You know, the one that taught me about escorting, she really was my best friend. You know, she was my best friend. Um, Before I had anything done, we looked a lot alike. You know, like people used to joke because you know she lived in Vegas here too for a while. Because after I moved to Vegas, then she would come here, and she was a stripper. By that point, she had stopped escorting and was just stripping. And she was a great, like she was really beautiful. So like she was one of the good strippers, you know, like she was night shift girl, made money at all the big clubs, and you know, like would get mad at one club and quit, and then go to another one the next day or that night, you know, like she was that kind of girl. She was a fucking pain in the ass, but but like people used to tease us because I'd bring her out to the bars with me and stuff like that, like the gay bars and stuff. And people would be like, you know, oh, I thought you had gotten in drag. And you know what I mean? Because we looked so much alike, which was a huge compliment. Like I said, she was very beautiful. And so she died. She had, you know, gotten into drugs and stuff like that. And she died when I, you know, after I had been in Phoenix been back home in Phoenix for like a year or something like that, after I quit escorting. No, I was still escorting, but just like very little in Phoenix. Still making really good money though, because I had like when like I'm remembering this time when I was in Phoenix, and I had like what I had done was I would still run ads in the magazine because that's the way it worked then. Now it's like all online and you know OnlyFans and stuff like that. But back then you would run ads in magazines, and so I still ran ads in magazines. But like I figured it out where I was like, well, I don't have to do every call, you know, and so I figured out how to vet them and how to just get the ones that were going to give me the money that I wanted. And so I was still escorting in Phoenix, but just not doing it at the level that I was doing it in Vegas. And so she ended up dying, and then I stayed in Phoenix for another.
What took her life?
She OD'd.
That's
Yeah,
what I was assuming, but I didn't.
yeah, and so
Sorry.
yeah, but you know, it's life and it's what happened. And so you know, so then that like, you know, like then I like I said, I was working or living a very regular life, you know, working a regular job, had a boyfriend, you know, we had a place, it was nice, it was well decorated, it was cute, it was comfortable. But you know, I just started to like get that feeling like, is this all there is? You know, when,
Totally.
when you're living a life that's not meant for you, I think you'll feel that way sometimes. And so, you know, I ended up well, everything happened like the way everything happened, it had to be fate, you know. My mom gave me this article, which I never read the articles my mom gives me, but she gave me this article that was a review on Terminator 3, I believe was what was out at that time. And so and at the end of the article, it turned out the article had been written by a local comedian that ran an open mic. And so it said that at the end of the article. It was like, this article is written by so and so. He runs a local open mic at this particular venue and it gave all the information.
Wow.
And so in my head, I was like, I gotta do this. You know what I mean? Because like that's the other thing. Like even back with escorting and you know with my friends and stuff like that, like I could always make them laugh, and I could make my friends laugh until they couldn't breathe. You know?
Wow. What a
so
gift.
yeah, so I was like, you know, I should probably do this, you know, and that's also, like I said, with escorting, that's also a part of the reason that the guys like me because I was very entertaining, you know, and every once in a while I'd show up to a call drunk or something and be really entertaining, you know, and so, like, you know, so I knew that that was something I could do. And when I was a kid, I always loved stand up. I left that part out, but, you know, like, yeah,
Wow.
I loved stand up when I was a kid, but I grew up in Casa Grande, Arizona. So when I was watching stand up on TV, it didn't ever seem like it was possible because you know here I am in this small town. There's no way I'm ending up on the TV. You know, like that's the way my kid mind saw it. So
Earliest and who did who impressed you the most earliest?
Louis Anderson was somebody I absolutely loved. Loved Louis Anderson. Roseanne Barr, George Carlin. I got exposed to Richard Pryor when I was super young. You know, my parents loved Richard Pryor. They thought he was just hilarious. And so like, you know, Eddie Murphy. But Eddie Murphy, my sister loved Eddie Murphy, so I was exposed to him. But for me, his stand-up I didn't like. You know, I love Eddie Murphy, like his movies. I love Eddie Murphy movies.
Me too.
But his stand-up wasn't for me. And
Yeah.
maybe now if I were to watch it, but back then it wasn't. You know what I mean? So I'm not gonna say he was one of my influences. He was just there, you know. But like, yeah, Roseanne Barr, Whoopi Goldberg back when she did her thing. I wasn't a Robin Williams fan. Like,
Really?
no, it was too spastic for me.
That's why I like it.
Yeah, even as a kid, I couldn't relate to that. You know what I mean? It was too like all over the place.
It is.
And so, and I'm not saying he's not good. Like I always say that about stand-up. You know what I mean? Just because you don't like somebody or they're not your cup of tea doesn't mean they're not good. It's like a very narrow-minded way to look at stand-up when you're like, you know, oh, they're not any good. It's like, you're right, Jerry Seinfeld sucks. He's just made millions and millions of dollars off of this particular talent, but he just fooled everybody. You're the only one that sees the truth.
What about that Jerry Seinfeld? What's that about?
Yeah, and you know, and I say that because Jerry Seinfeld is a good example of that for me because I don't particularly like Jerry Seinfeld stand-up. Yeah, but I know obviously it's good. You know, there's a market for it.
Yeah.
It's the talent, you know, but it's just not mine. It's not my particular taste. But yeah, those are some of the people that I really did like.
You know what I like at the best of a comic these days is if I can watch them, and I do, I will watch them over and over and over in person on YouTube. And if I cannot figure them out what they're doing,
Yeah,
then I like it.
yeah,
Like that's what mystified me about watching you is that I can watch you over and over and could you please tell me what you're doing on stage because like I can't figure it out. So then, but like if you're watching, you go, okay, that was a triplet. Okay. Now that was a pause, you know, like, but you don't go rapid fire. You just do unique stuff that's not classic textbook that I can't, you know, and you do it well and complicated enough that it keeps me interested.
yeah. That's a weird thing. Like, but sometimes people will try to think the opposite of me. Like, there was one comic that he's very by the book comedian. You know what I mean? And like, he's funny, he's good. Like, people like him and stuff like that, and we're friendly, you know. But like one time he was like, "Yeah, I could notice that you were counting beats when you were on stage," and I was like, "I don't count beats on stage." You know what I mean? I don't even think about that. Like everything I do is intuitive on stage. It's like, you know, I wait until they're done laughing or till I feel like it's the right point, you know, because sometimes I want to ride that last laugh, you know what I mean? Sometimes I don't want to let it die out all the way because I want to hit them with another one, and I know that that'll give me like a better pop, you know what I mean? But I know all this while I'm on stage. It's not like something I can plan for because I don't know how hard they're gonna laugh. Like, you know that from doing stand-up. Different jokes produce different results on different nights, you
At
know?
the same club.
Yeah, and you'll think like, you know, I know how this joke works. And then it's like, you know, you didn't laugh at that part. That's the part everybody laughs at. And then you'll say something that's not the part everybody laughs at, and they start going crazy. And you're like, this isn't where the laugh goes. So you just have to work with it. You know, you just have to be in the moment and be like, okay, you know, like that's the worst thing is when people over plan. It's always obvious, you know, because it's like they'll plan for say like the audience to get uncomfortable about something, and the audience instead on a particular night will laugh at what they said, but they have that line about the audience getting uncomfortable, and they're like, "So you got uncomfortable?" It's like, no, they didn't. Maybe most nights they do, but tonight they didn't, and you're still telling them they got uncomfortable, and then you know you'll notice that the audience will get a little weird at that point sometimes because it's disjointed because they're like, "You're uncomfortable. Nobody even everybody laughed," you know. It's so.
It's so funny.
But yeah, I don't count beats. I don't think about any of that stuff.
What's your favorite thing to do when you're on stage? If I had to guess, no, I don't want to tell
Yes.
you who you are. But it seems to be like you. Can I say a cuss word on my own show?
Of course.
I think you like to fuck with people. I think you get that twinkle in your eye, and you know, like when things go wrong, you don't try, and you're just gonna you know, oh, here's another opportunity to be the buck. You know, I think you really enjoy that. You're not necessarily a crowd work person, although I've seen you do it.
Yeah.
But I think you really like, you know what they're gonna feel and what they're feeling, and you like to pull back and make them wait for it. I don't know. It's a dance you do with the audience. They don't even know you're dancing.
I'm a true empath, so that
Okay.
helps. You know what I mean? Like I am a true. That's part of the reason that I don't hang out with a lot of people because I don't want to take on a lot of people's energy. You know, a lot of people have bad energy, and if you're a true empath, like you know, you'll sometimes get mistaken for like being a sociopath because you like you know.
So wow.
Yeah, I shut a lot of people out, but it's only because it's like self-preservation, you know. And so, like when you're on stage, that's a huge advantage, you know, because you can feel what they're feeling. And so I know when they're getting uncomfortable, but I also know when like I can like use that tension and like if you have well-written punchlines, and also like the other thing that I always tell people that I don't think a lot of people pay attention to is the audience can sense what your intentions are. And like my intentions are always to make them laugh. My intentions are always to find the most fun part about something, whether it's about LGBT politics, whatever it is. I always want to find the most fun part about it. So with that combination, it gives me you know, because I actually do write, even if I write on stage, like it gives me a lot of like the audience will give me a lot of leeway because they can tell that my intention is to make them laugh, you know? And so yeah, you're right. I do like fucking with them to a certain degree, but my real thing that I like doing is I like making them laugh at stuff they don't think they should be laughing.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's my thing. Like, you know, a lot of my stuff is like if that joke that I got in trouble for, the one about, you know, the cocoon, like trans people stay at home until you're pretty.
Yeah, I
the
love that
punchline.
joke.
Yeah, well, it's because nobody sees it coming. You know what I mean? Like, because it sounds like I'm going to say something very serious right there, and instead that's what I say. You know, and so I love that that it happened so fast that the audience doesn't at first realize that that's what I just said. Like it makes them laugh before they realize it. Then once they think about it, they're like, "Should I be laughing? I don't know." Like you know, so yeah, I like that a lot.
I love that joke. I love that joke. And it comes from such a pure place.
Yeah.
You know, talking about trans people, you know, you might want to stay at home until you look pretty. So funny.
Yeah.
And you're not doing it in a mean spirited way. You're just like, and like, even people who are not part of the LGBTQIA, whatever, we never even thought of it or thought of saying it or saying it in public,
Yeah.
but we know it's right.
Yeah.
You know, like,
And then there's also the fact that, like, you know, like really what is pretty, and you should decide when you're pretty. You know, like that's the part about the joke that people don't get. Like, you know, like at a point you have to decide that it doesn't matter what these people think. You know what I mean? As long as you're beautiful to you, then what do you care if they accidentally like? Because if you notice in the joke, I say they accidentally misgender you. If they accidentally call you he and you're supposed to be a she, you know what I mean? Like that's the thing. Like if it's an honest accident and you're comfortable with where you're at in your process, and say you're not traditionally pretty yet, or you haven't gotten to the point where you perfected your look or whatever. But if you're comfortable with where you are in your process and you're like, hey, I know I'm working this, I know that I'm getting to where I want to be, then what do you care what they think? You know, like me, and I think that that's also part of what people should understand when I'm doing a joke is do you not see the irony in the fact that because of the amount of work that I've had done, there are some people that don't see me as traditionally beautiful. You know what I mean? But like I decide that. So I don't care what you think about me.
I love that.
You know, and that's what people should get from it. It should be like take a more empowered stance instead of like letting them decide what you are. You decide what you are, and then it doesn't matter what they say.
Love that. That's very encouraging. That's motivation.
Thank you, but you know it's not funny, so I gotta just leave it at the joke. You know what I mean? And then I let people assume the rest, and most people are dumb, so they're just like, you're like, oh well, and clearly he's just saying trans people should stay at home, and it's like, shut up, you know, like I don't care.
Do you prefer, what type of heckler do you prefer to have? Silent, drunk, obnoxious, won't shut up, woman, entitled white lady?
You know what? If they heckle, as long as they have a sense of humor about themselves, I don't mind them. I don't care what they are. I don't care if they're drunk. I don't care. Like, as long as they have a sense of humor about themselves, then I'm good. Like I don't mind hecklers. I'm not. I think like when people get like, because there are obnoxious hecklers, and those I mind. You know what I mean? Like the ones that are truly just trying to make it about themselves. Those I don't like. But like for the most part, I think when comics get mad at hecklers, it really is about ego. Because they're like, I've written this genius material, and now here you are, you drunk slob. You know what I mean? Like interrupting my prose of genius. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, well, I've heard your set uninterrupted, and it's really not that.
She could elevate it, actually.
Yeah, like let her help you out. Trust me, this bitch isn't gonna hurt anything. You
You do it yourself just fine.
yeah, you might have a co-writer if you're not careful.
Have you had a heckler feed you a new line?
Yeah, I can't remember specifically off the top of my head, but plenty. Yeah, I mean, like, cause I have fun with hecklers. I don't mind at all. I've worked so many redneck clubs at this point, and with the redneck clubs, you don't have security usually, regular security. You have a bouncer. At clubs you have security who'll come by and be like, yeah, keep it down. You know what I mean? Or table talk, that kind of stuff. But when you're at a redneck bar, they're kind of like, you need us to toss this bitch? It's like, slow down, slow down. All right, we don't, let's not toss anybody.
If they mean it.
Yeah, and I did and also, but if that does happen, you get known as the comedian that wasn't able to handle the audience when that incident happened. And in a lot of places that I perform, like now I do some stuff that's better, but I still do plenty of small towns and stuff like that. And what you also forget is in a lot of cases, these people are locals and regulars. So if you get them thrown out of their local bar, now that's going to cost the bar that revenue that they usually bring in, and their friends bring in and whatever else. And then that could turn into a whole like thing where it's like, now there's a kind of a group that doesn't want to come back because Cheryl isn't allowed, and Cheryl that comedian was mean to Cheryl and Cheryl got put out, and so I didn't want to be that guy. And so I quickly learned to just have fun with the audience, like pretty much almost anything they would do, And because I had that attitude, a lot of audiences really liked me. But that sometimes would lead, like the first standing ovation I ever got on the road was from that kind of situation. And god damn, that was a hard, like outwardly it looked fun, but like on the inside, it was a lot of work. Because what happened was I got on stage and I was bombing. No exaggeration, I was bombing. And the comedian before me, Chris Storin, was like, on the road with me, he was featuring for me, and he had just really killed it. And I get on stage and I'm like, he's more animated, I'm more dry. And so, and I was new to headlining at that time. And so I get on stage and, dry, delivering material and just bombing. McAllen, Texas. And then somebody heckles me. And I say something shitty back to them. And the audience goes crazy. Like they all just start laughing. And then somebody else heckles me. And so I say something shitty to them. And so my set turns into just that. It's just 45 minutes of me just like back and forth to the point where I got them in such a frenzy. There was a guy barking like a dog at a point during my set, like literally like a big like woof. And I was like, what the fuck is happening? You know what I mean? But I was just like, in my head, I was like, just go with it. You know what I mean? The alternative was bombing like you were at the beginning. So just whatever they want, you do it, And it was just like, just bam, bam, bam. So I told them, because, they sent shots up to the stage after a while. And I was like, I don't drink when I'm on stage. But this is McAllen, Texas. And, like we're becoming friends through my set, and they're really loving me. And so like what happened was I had like, I don't know how many shots on the stage by the time I was done, but there were several shots on the stage by the time I was done. And so, like, the way I ended my set, because, I was doing so much, like, just, and it literally was that, no exaggeration, just that much crowd work, just one person, another person, just fucking, like, this person starts again, and it was the whole set of me just doing that. And so I told them, like, look, I got to get out of here now. And they were like, they were chanting for me to do my shot. I was like, don't do shots on stage. So the way that I compromised with them, I was like, I have to do at least one joke so that I can get off stage. It's going to be an actual joke. I was like, if you guys let me do this one joke, I'll do my shot and then I'll get the fuck out of here. And so I was like, deal. And people started clapping. And so I did one joke, which was my regular closer. They loved it. I did my shot. I fucking, left to huge applause. And then Chris Dorian looks out at the curtain. He was like, you're getting a standing O right now. And I turn around and look, and they're actual standing O.
Wow. That sends chills up my spine.
Yeah, I just looked at it from the back. You know what I mean? I didn't walk back down to be happy or anything, even though I wanted to, but I just looked out and was like, that's great. You know what I mean?
Wow.
But yeah, that's a big part of how I learned to do crowd work.
Favorite comedian you've ever met in person for a second at an airport or whatever?
I got to work with her, and it was what's it called? Some people are gonna not know who this is, and I don't care. But like for me, because the combination of her being so nice, and I've not recognized her. I knew her from when I was a kid. You know what I mean? Like watching her on TV, Judy Tenuta.
Yes.
Yeah.
Judy Tenuta.
And she was so sweet that it was like worth the meeting. You know what I mean? It was like, and I don't remember if I was featuring for her. Yeah, I was featuring for her at Ventura Harbor Comedy Club. And yeah, she was just so sweet and so nice. And like I said, I had really, really seen her, because you remember she was on the Sprite commercials, and then she was like a 7-Up. She was 7-Up. Yeah, that was her campaign. But like when I was a kid, she was on all the shows, and I was that much of a stand-up fanatic when I was a kid, and such a nerd when it came to stand-up that I really did watch everything, and I loved Judy Tenuta, and my parents were excited for me because since I was a kid, my parents would see the stuff that I would watch and stuff like that, so they knew Judy Tenuta because they knew I was always laughing at her.
She was a big deal.
Yeah, and her accordion, and you know what I mean, like. So yeah, when I worked with her, that was the.
You got to actually work with her.
Yeah.
So there's a Portland comic, older Jewish guy named Ira. He swears he hated her for a long time. Older guy.
Yeah.
I don't even know if he's still alive. Did you ever meet an Ira when you were around?
No, because I just worked with her the one time, and she this was probably 2005 or 2006. It had to be like that because I'm pretty sure it was before, because I've worked with some really great people, like toured with some really great people, Russell Peters, Joe Coy, Gabriel Iglesias, all of them are great. All of them, helped me out a lot in their own different ways. And so I'm not trying to discount them by saying Judy Tenuta, but I didn't grow up watching Joe Coy. Joe Coy is close to my age, you know what I mean? And so Russell Peters, same thing, Gabriel Iglesias, same thing. But when it comes to Judy Tenuta, that's somebody that when I was a kid, I was like, I actually.
I'm affected by you.
Yeah. And so Judy Tenuta would be the one. But it was just the one weekend, and that was it.
Wow. So what is it that you want to accomplish the rest of your life? Comedy and off stage.
The rest of my life in comedy, well, I still have a lot of growth to do, but I'm what's it called? I have faith that everything will turn out the way I want it to be. And so I will be performing at the level that I want to perform at, in the next couple of years. I know I'll figure that out. Right now, I think it's more important for me to build my online presence. So I've been working on my YouTube quite a bit, and my social media presence, because I feel like that's the better way in this climate. Like if this was back, years ago, then work the road or whatever. But now I've worked the road so much that it's like, I feel very comfortable on the road or like on stage, you know what I mean? But like when it comes to the road itself, I don't necessarily love the version of the road that I'm doing. Nothing against any of the clubs that I do, they're great, you know, and I'm thankful for the opportunities. But just, you know, there is a certain amount of money you make and there is a certain level of hotel you're in. And, you know, so I want to elevate that. So that's like professionally what I want to do. Professionally on the local scene, I want to continue to help build this scene and I want to see this become the world-class scene that it should be because I feel like Las Vegas should be on par when it comes to stand-up because we're not the same size city. But when it comes to stand-up specifically, I feel like we should be on par with New York, LA, what Austin is turning into, you know. And I know enough people in different cities and like, you know, through my road connections and stuff that I want to be able to help the other comedians that are doing well here and putting in the work here get on the road and get opportunities so that they can grow and then they come back here and they're even more of an asset to the scene than they already are. And if we continue to like, you know, work together, because there's a few like you know, I don't even like to acknowledge it, but like there are a few bad apples on the scene or whatever, people that like to make trouble just to make trouble or whatever. But I really feel like that'll wash itself out, you know, because I see what's out there and I interact with a lot of what's out there, you know, as far as the good up and coming comedians. And I don't even care if you're like a year in, you know what I mean? You're a brand new comic. If you're being serious about it and you're trying to make things happen, I'll be cool with you, you know? And so like with that being my attitude, there's a lot more people and also a lot of the comics are starting to see because you know I will actually help people out and so they're actually seeing that and they're seeing that I'm not just talking and saying I want to do these things like you know and so I feel like as that continues to grow and as my relationships continue to grow and as I help the other comics develop I feel like that also is a very achievable goal. And even within the next couple of years, I think we can really elevate it to where we need it to be, you know, or where I want it to be. Just, you know, by people putting in the work. And yeah, I talk a lot of shit and I make fun of things but that's part of being a comic, you know, like last night, I opened my set at Wise Guys, you know, at the open mic by saying something shitty. I don't remember what it was, but I fucking threw the other comics under the bus. But I also feel like if you know me and you're another comedian, you would have just laughed at it because you know that it's not serious. It's like me because you know the audience was being shitty with everybody, but then at the same time, a fair amount of the comics were folding to that, you know. And so like it was the perfect storm for me to like say what I said and have like the audience get it and the comics to have a sense of humor about themselves get it and but you know, I feel like if more people take on that attitude, like we really can bring this city back to where it doesn't necessarily just have to be 4 or 5, but it can be like a Rat Pack type vibe, you know, where you go everywhere and the audience loves that, especially here in Vegas, where they feel like the comics are bouncing off each other and the comics have a sense of humor about each other. You know, there's so many comics that I love in this city, like Chris Shaw, or, Angie Crum, Kitty Pineapple, and they're like all of the people that I mentioned. Like, if they were to make a joke about me on stage, I wouldn't take that at all personally or think
The
it comes
compliments, free advertising.
exactly.
They're
You
gonna
know,
remember your name better.
yeah, and the same with them. You know what I mean? I feel like all of them, I could joke about them and they'd get it too, and they'd be part of it. You know, and I feel like those are just some of the names. Chris Clark is another one. Like, you know, there's just Kenny Prince. You know, but there's just comics in this city that I like. I feel like most of the comics in this city are kind of that vibe. And so, like, you know, if we can just get everybody to start, you know, working as much as they can, then, you know, I think that'll be like a good thing.
Yes, absolutely.
And then in regular life, if I want to, you know, I want to be a dad. I don't know if I want to, like, the last couple of weeks, I'm not at all bitter towards love at all, you know, but I don't know how necessary, like, you know, I'm not sure. I know me, I'll fall in love a lot. I'm not worried about never loving again. You know what I mean? There are worries in my life, that's not one of them. But as far as like being worried about you know, settling down with one person for the rest of my life. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been giving that more and more thought. And yeah, if that happens, that would be great. I'm not gonna lie to you and say that I wouldn't like to settle down and, have that. But at the same time, I don't feel like it's 100% necessary, and I don't feel like my life won't be complete if it doesn't happen that way. For me, the only thing that I really want is just to be a dad. So,
That's super cool.
I just need more money.
You're gonna get it. So where do you want these millions of people, especially that are watching right this second? We know why people watch later, but where people that watch this, where do you want them to follow you or donate to help you?
People can follow me on youtube.com/Ty Rivera, or if they just search Ty Rivera, ThairIvera. That's a great way for people to support me. And, they'll see on that stuff, I'll usually put my Venmo and my Cash App. But really, for me, the most important thing right now is just people subscribing to my channel and also hitting the notifications so they get, when I put out my newest videos. But, it's nice when people support financially or whatever, but I'm not in a position where it's like, I need it. It's great.
Don't stop doing it.
It's great. I'd much rather spend your money than mine, trust me. Every one of my exes will tell you that. But yeah, so like YouTube and then Instagram, official Ty Rivera. That's a good place to. I should start clicking that. Official Ty Rivera on Instagram. That's another platform that I feel is important. And then obviously if they're here, then they know how to get a hold of me on Facebook. You'll see the tags.
Yes. Where are you going to be performing in the near future?
Well, they're not going to be able to make it to this one unless they just happen to live in Colorado Springs. But Friday and Saturday, so tomorrow and the next day, I'll be in Colorado Springs performing at Looney's. Then I know I have other stuff on the books. Like I know I'm going to be doing Last Unlimited in Sacramento coming up. I'm at Stir Crazy Comedy. I think February 27th and 28th, or like somewhere around there. So and they can check usually I'll post all that stuff on my Instagram and that kind of stuff. And so but yeah, I know like February I'm at Stir Crazy Comedy Club in Glendale, Arizona. And then as far as locally, I do an open mic. I run an open mic with a comedian by the name of AJ Rivera. We're not related at all, but we're both Riveras. So that counts for something, I guess.
I was gonna say a punchline. Are either one of you a cheetah? Sorry, that's so bad.
I probably am closer to a cheetah.
So bad.
But yeah, so we run that open mic every Thursday. It starts at 11 o'clock. So if anybody ever wants to come see me there, I usually close that mic out, which like the other day I saw somebody trying to like make fun of that and be like, who starts an open mic to headline it? And I was like, if you think I'm headlining after 20 comedians, you don't know how comedy works. I am going last at that open mic is what happens.
So stupid to think that.
Yeah, it's like, did you think I thought that was headlining? Like it is unfortunately my residency, you could say, because I'm there every Thursday, but I definitely don't think I'm headlining it. It's like
I had 18 openers.
Yeah, did you like the show? It's like that wasn't a show. Were you in the room? Well, actually I wasn't, but none of your business. None of your business how I spend my night.
Get a life.
You think I'm just gonna sit here and watch all 20 of them? No.
To what degree do you pay attention to each of the 20?
You know
It's
what?
hard to tell what you're focusing on. I think you can multitask. So I don't know if you're picking up or you're like you could. I think you can do this and be interviewed at the same time. So you could potentially listen to every comic, and I wouldn't know.
Yeah, the comics, the way I work that is case by case. The comics that I feel like are being serious and at least working on stuff, I'll tune in because sometimes I want feedback from me, and I don't mind giving a little bit of feedback, if they'll take the time to come out to the mic, buy a couple drinks, get some food, I'll
Donate my cancer.
I'll definitely give them at least a little bit of this is what I think is happening or whatever, if they ask for it. But just yeah, I will pay attention. And then I do make sure that, the talk in the room stays to a minimum as well, so that they can actually have a fair shot at trying out their stuff. And that's something a lot of people don't really see me doing, even though it's happening. And so sometimes people think I'm not paying attention because they'll ask me about their set and I'll be like, I didn't get to see it or whatever. But with that mic, because I love them so much, the Ocha bar and the staff has been so helpful with me and so cool with me, because I had a relationship with them before I started running this mic. I've known them for a couple of years now since I first got here. And so because I have that relationship with them, occasionally I will ask comics to move if they're not eating, because people that actually want to sit and eat, so I'll do that. I will get people menus. I also will quiet people down. And I think all of that helps give a better experience for the person that's on stage. And so for me, it's maybe I'm not always able to look at people's sets, but I am definitely helping their set, because I joke about not being in the room, but really I am usually in the room for the entire mic, unless I want to go outside and smoke a quick cigarette or something like that. And then I miss 7 or 10 minutes, especially right now because it's cold. And so I don't really like to be outside that much anyway, and so, but yeah, I pay a fair amount of attention, because I feel like I said, if people are going to make the effort to actually come out to our mic, then I know, because I don't look at it, like I said, as me headlining or whatever, but I know that me being there does make some of the comics want to come out, because they know there's a chance that I'll see them, and if I see them and I like them, there's a chance they can go on the road with me, or I can hook them up with some work. And so I feel like the trade-off for that is I should somewhat pay attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like I said, if I feel like somebody's being serious about what they're doing, I'll watch. If I feel like they're just there to be part of the social scene or waste time, and the set just happens to be the aside to whatever their other agenda is, I don't care. I'm not gonna,
Got it.
Yeah.
So you help comics all the time in your podcast, that you have a portion of your podcast set aside. My last question.
Yeah.
To just give tips. Where did your heart for that come from? Your heart for Vegas comedy? I mean, just from seeing a lot of errors out there?
No, just like I said, when I was a kid, I loved stand-up. And now that I do it, I really do. It's not one of those things, when they say to be careful what you wish for, because when they say to be careful what you wish for, it's it turns out not to be what you thought it was going to be. Well, to be honest, certain parts of stand-up haven't turned out to be what I thought they were going to be. But I still love stand-up, and you never know what anything's going to be until you start actually doing it. Everything's different from what your perception of it was before you started doing it. But I really do love stand-up, and I really do love the fact that, a lot of the people that I see on the scene really love it as well. And if it's if I can use my experience, because I've been doing this for 19 years now, and a lot of that was before I was getting paid and doing the open mics and stuff like that. So if I can cut out some of the guesswork for some of these people, and even if they can't necessarily apply my exact advice, if it even sparks them to think of their own way that they could, then I feel that's a huge service for people, and all that's going to help me, because like I said, I want the scene to get better. So if I can help out by just putting out these Comedy Tip Tuesdays and have that make it better, and I can hit more people that way than I can hit individually by telling everybody this, then I feel like that's helping me out. When sometimes people have that idea that you have to be afraid of competition or afraid of other people coming up in what you're doing. I'm not only not afraid of the competition, I'm creating the competition. I want the competition.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I want everything to get better. So that's part of why it's it's for them, but it's also kind of self-serving in the way that, the better things get, the better area I have, the better playground I have.
I love that. That's very selfless.
Unselfish at the same time.
That's true.
It's a typical me.
It reminds me of the episode on Friends where Phoebe was trying to do things that were not selfish.
Uh,
And there was nothing she could do that didn't come back to her.
yeah,
So yeah, whatever you do for other people will come back to
yeah, and it's impossible, but it's also a good thing,
you.
so.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot. This is our time. And thank you so much, Ty Rivera. Follow him, Ty Rivera on YouTube, and all his links are there.
Thanks for watching.
I would turn it off.
Hey,
After I step on
come,
Chihuahua.
come here. What are you doing, huh? You little grouch? What are you mad about?